morning, everyone. Today is February 1st, 2024, and welcome to the New Possibilities Hour, part of the Will Work for Food project founded by Natalie Armstrong-Motin. Every Thursday morning, Jean Lawler and I host another cutting-edge webinar for mediators, arbitrators, lawyers, and everybody who negotiates. As you know, there's no charge for these great programs. Rather, we ask people to contribute to a food bank if they like what they see. And so far, our audiences have been so generous, donating in honor of our great speakers. One of my favorite parts every week is when we announce the running total of just how much people have contributed. Natalie Armstrong-Motin, would you please do the honors?
Jeff, I would be happy to. So, donations that people have let us know about to date is $520,022.44. Millions and millions of people have been fed due to the generosity of our audience. Thank you all so much.
Fabulous. Thank you so much, Natalie, and thank you so much to our great audiences and our great speakers. Today we have another great speaker, Alexandra Hudson, author of this terrific book, The Soul of Civility. I've read the book, and let me tell you, it's a great read. It's elegant, it's elevated, it's sophisticated, it's dignified. It's really summarizes the history of civility and humanity's battle to enforce civility and where it comes from, how we go awry, and how we get back on track. Let me read you Alexandra Hudson's biography. It's right here in the back cover of the book. Alexandra Hudson is a writer, storyteller, and the founder of Civic Renaissance, a publication and intellectual community dedicated to reviving the wisdom of the past to help us lead richer lives in the present. She was named a 2019 Novak Journalism Fellow, and she contributes to Fox News, CBS News, The Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Time Magazine, Politico Magazine, and Newsweek. Her TV series, Storytelling and the Human Condition, was produced with The Great Courses and is available for streaming on Wondrium and Audible. Hudson earned a master's degree in public policy at the London School of Economics as a Rotary Scholar. An adjunct professor at the Indiana University Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, she lives in Indianapolis with her husband and children, and came to our attention as the author of this terrific book. And I know Natalie will be posting a link in the chat. People are inspired to buy the book, as I hope they will be. We'll make it easy for them with a link right in the chat. So, Lexi, we're very interested in hearing from you as to civility. Please tell us a word or two about the food bank to which you would like people to contribute if they're in a position to do so. And then help us restore civility. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Jeff and Natalie, for your ongoing efforts for local food banks, and also to all of you here for your work in navigating the deepest and most important question of our day, which is how do we flourish with others amid deep difference? And so I am asking everyone to donate to Gleaners. Gleaners is a food bank here in Indianapolis that's kind of a hub for the community and just a beloved institution here in Indianapolis, where I live, where I'm based. But yeah, a little bit about the book. The Soul of Civility is the product of a decade of work and a lifetime of thought. And it is about this question of great urgency to our current moment, as we, in the face of growing extremism around the world, across the political spectrum, in the face of in America, the very divisive election cycle that we find ourselves in right now. And we can feel powerless in the face of this seemingly intractable challenge, because the fact is it is intractable, as I talk about in my book. This question of how do we flourish and peacefully coexist even when we differ? This is the most important question of our moment. It's also the defining question of democracy, of the classical liberal project. But it is also the defining human question. As long as we've been around as a species, we've tried to do this thing called life together. We are doggedly social as a species. And we know that our chances of survival and our opportunities to flourish are increased and can only be realized in relationship with others in community. So as long as we've been around across time and place, we've come together in these cooperative communities and in friendship and in civilization. And yet, despite our doggedly social nature, we are also defined morally and biologically by self-love. We are geared to put our own needs above others, to see things from our own perspective over those of those around us. And those two facets of who we are, the self-love and the love of others, are in tension. And that is why this thing called life together and friendship and community and democracy and civilization itself is always fragile. It is never a foregone conclusion. And so that's a little bit about kind of the overview of how I approach this book and survey across history and across culture to see that despite the timelessness of this problem, for example, I go back to the oldest story in the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then I jump to the oldest book in the world, the Maxims of Ptahhotep, given to us from ancient Egypt, 4,000 plus years ago. To show that the timelessness and intractability of the problem. But the book is also very practical, and it's meant to be a handbook for leaders like you to be part of the solution in your everyday, not just in your vocation as lawyers, as arbitrators, as mediators, but also just as people going about the marketplace of life. And that's what I encourage all of my readers, and I hope all of my readers come away with an increased and heightened sense of the stakes of this problem and the power and opportunity we each have to be a part of the solution in just elevating and ennobling the everyday junctures of life that can be anonymous and very, purely utilitarian. The taxi cab driver and the grocery store clerk that we just, it's very tempting for us to just want to get from point A to point B as quickly as possible. But that each of those are important junctures that can renew our resolve and the others' resolve to be part of this thing called life together across deep difference, this thing called society, this thing called democracy, that again is beautiful and noble, but also profoundly fragile. So that's kind of an overview of the book and some of the ideas that I think are pertinent to especially this community. And I'd love to hear from you. Where do you want to go? Thank you for reading the book, Jeff and Natalie. And I'd love to hear what aspects of the book were most interesting to you and what could be great and useful to your audience.
Well, in reading it, Lexi, I thought that the historical perspective that this is not a new problem, that since ancient Egypt, we've been dealing with this question of how we balance our regard for ourselves and our regard for others. And I think the audience would truly benefit from hearing from you the pointers, the specifics. How do we get along if some of your relatives vote in a red state and some are in a blue state, and yet everybody's getting together for Thanksgiving dinner? How do we all get along? That's one thing that's very important. And after we talk about the micro level, I'd like to talk about some things that are specific to the context of lawyering. But before we get into that rich territory, talk to us about ordinary social interactions and how to deal with people who have generally different orientations than yourself. And then what do you do when somebody is going on and on about a position on, you name the hot button social issue,
Right.
and they're pretty strident about a view that's different than yours?
I think two essential skills that you have as mediators that kind of get to the granularity of what this looks like in practice, how you help people in practice navigate deep difference. One is, and that are both central to my book. One is curiosity. We are so sure. We live in an age generally of moral certainty, and that's especially true at the individual level as well, that we You know, we see things from our own perspective very clearly, and we see them less clearly from the view of others. We think that we're correct and perfectly whole and informed in our views, and that other people are clearly missing bits of the story and that they're insufficient and deficient. And what's that great John Stuart Mill side? Like, he who sees only their side sees only half the case, half the perspective. And that's so true. And so what you as mediators and arbitrators are excellent at doing, and why you have such an important role, is that, you know, in an impartial, calm way, you're not weaponizing the other side's position. You're saying, but have you considered it this way? And you're kind of opening up people's minds to being curious and open to another perspective, another interpretation of the facts, different facts entirely. And in my book, I talk about how curiosity is strangely deficient today because of this ethos of moral certainty. We think we have all the answers, and anyone who disagrees with us is just, you know, wrong, and not just wrong, morally bad as well. Like, it's really seductive. This is not a new thing, but it's really tempting to vilify people that think differently than we do. Like, difference is not just difference. It goes a step further to it. It becomes a moral dimension to it, that because of the difference, there is a badness there as well. They're less rational. They're not fully human. Like, these narratives are really easy to kind of imbibe and embody, and that's why we use mediators come in and even, you know, having the opportunity to sit down and look face to face at the other party, like that's powerful. That can often kind of refute some of the dehumanizing narratives that the parties might have spun in their respective heads, to like look the other party in the eye. I think it's interesting. There are reasons for this, but a lot of our legal system depersonalizes, right? Like, you have people, like your lawyers talk to each other, and it's not parties grappling with one another, right? And even in arbitration, where parties are separated the entire time, and the mediators back and forth, that's a distancing effect that diminishes an opportunity to see the other party face to face and be confronted with their humanity, and reminded of our common humanity, that there is an opportunity for that can be really important. But, you know, back to curiosity, that, you know, the curious life is the life well lived. And my parents modeled this for me growing up. My parents are very highly educated, very credentialed. They have a lot in the ways of formal schooling. My father, for example, is 3 masters and his PhD. But they knew and modeled for my brothers and I that learning was a way of life, that the good life was this disposition of engaging others and the world around us with a sense of awe and wonder, and having experiences, even really hard and negative ones, approaching that with curiosity to, what can this teach me? What am I learning from this? And even when we encounter difficult people that we don't like, what is this teaching me here? What am I learning from this person? That every experience and every opportunity it is an opportunity to teach us something about ourselves, about the world around us. And that is the stuff of the good life, but that's also an essential part of the solution to our deep divides today, where, again, we're affirmed in our correctness on all fronts. Like, we go to our news media, we surround ourselves with people that just agree with us. Like, we're increasingly siloed, both virtually, but also physically. It's all too easy to just go through life and not really encounter people we don't want to encounter. And then when we do encounter difference, we're kind of shocked that people see the world so differently than we do. When in fact, there's a lot of difference out there that we're just, you know, blissfully kind of insulated from, intentionally insulated from. So anyway, curiosity, that's one practical virtue and skill set that I think you as mediators, arbitrators, and even lawyers are good at fostering on the other side, as you're dealing with the other party and trying to get people to see another point of view. You know, Jeff, you mentioned how so much of the division today and toxicity today, it feels existential. It feels visceral. And I argue in the final chapter of my book that as a society, we've actually misplaced our meaning. We've made idols out of public life, of political public issues, of things, of transient things, not eternal, immovable, like soul nourishing things. I argue that as a society, as things like faith, family, civil society, community have been on the decline, that people have increasingly misplaced their meaning in other aspects of their lives, often, for example, politics and political issues. And that is bad for our souls, and that is bad for democracy as well. Um, Here are some symptoms of this sort of misplaced meaning. One symptom is the rise of people who are, triggered. You're having an everyday conversation, a topic is kind of barely broached, and all of a sudden someone inordinately responds, like it's as if you've like assaulted their very identity in life because you have, you just mentioned a topic, and it's like they feel under assault, like they've misplaced their meaning in that topic, and that's why they feel this overriding sense to defend themselves and defend whatever it is that has felt threatened. So kind of the trigger happy nature of a lot of our public discourse and public life today. Another symptom of this misplaced meaning is that public life and the divisive issues of our day now seem to be everywhere. Politics seems to be everywhere. Previously, spheres of our lives that were politically neutral or apolitical now has a political valence and dimension to it, like where we grocery shop, where we send our kids to school, what newspaper we read, these, what sports teams we're rooting for, like things that used to be just generally apolitical now have a political dimension to them, which is harmful. Like we need to be able to take a break, take a step back from politics and public life in order to come back to the hard conversations. But if we're only doing the hard conversations all day, every day, and then we're assaulted with the division at every facet, we never have a break from it. That's hard, and that's bad for our souls, bad for democracy. Another symptom of this misplaced meaning is the number of friendships, personal relationships, family relationships that have deteriorated or have even been broken entirely. People cutting one another off because of these divisive issues, saying like, your view on the vaccine, your view on Donald Trump, like that, your view on one thing is the sum total of who you are. I know everything I need to know about you, and therefore I don't want to be associated with you anymore. And the reality is that there are so many more important things than these issues that we've misplaced. We've elevated these issues to kind of to the level of our identity, of who we are, placed our meaning in them. And we've overdone democracy by letting it invade these aspects of our lives, these issues invade all aspects of our lives. And as a result, we're undermining our democracy, our institutions as a result. And so I argue that we have to recover areas of our lives. It's not enough just to say, okay, we have an unhealthy addiction to XYZ thing. Like this is also the psychology of Alcoholics Anonymous, of Weight Watchers. When you have an unhealthy attachment to a thing, an addiction, you can't just say, okay, soul, like love the addiction, the addictive substance less. Like you have to displace the unhealthy love with something more noble and more beautiful. And things I talk about doing that with include curiosity, having a sense of wonder, and having that sense of wonder displace the animosity and the certainty that comes with that. I talk about friendship, seeking out friendship, even across difference, especially across difference, cultivating that baseline of trust that is so missing in our world today, so that we can have those healthy conversations across difference. Because the fact is, we lack that trust. We lack that basic affection with people that we differ with. And therefore, we're inclined to vilify, to dehumanize, to assume the worst, to not give the benefit of the doubt. And all of those things are the enemy of reconciliation, of resolution, and of peaceful coexistence across difference. I talk about beauty and the sublime. Just raise your hands if there, I don't think there's a voting section, but put in the chat how many, your answer to this question. How many people do you think have gone to space in the history of mankind? Put your answer in the chat if the chat function's open to everyone, which I hope it is. So put your answer. How many people have gone to space? I want to hear your answers. 100. Okay, less than 100 says .25, less than 500. 127, very specific. Love that, Kevin. Okay, this is great. There's been about 700 people who have gone to space in the history of space travel and mankind. And time again, across history and across culture, of course, space travel is relatively new in recent history, but across culture, the people who have gone to space have experienced what scientists now call the overview effect, where astronauts go to space and they look down and they see Earth, our vibrant blue and green planet, in the context of this cruel and lifeless space, like galaxy. And they don't see borders. They don't see political difference. They don't see ethnic difference. They don't see race. They just see a little blip of life in a lifeless and cruel and vast galaxy. And they feel this sense of terror, this sense of fear, and this sense of wonder that kind of brings them to grief and joy at the same time. If you look up the overview effect, you'll see this described time and time again. In fact, William Shatner, the Star Trek actor, recently went to space and wrote an article about his experience with the overview effect. And he has this, beautiful line where he says, there were no borders anymore. There were no differences. There were no, all I saw was a common humanity and a fragile and beautiful life-giving earth and a common humanity. He was overwhelmed with, again, this joy, this grief, this sadness, and just a humbling experience of appreciating the beauty of the world. And that the overview effect, and I encourage you all, maybe Natalie can Google William Shatner's description of the overview effect and put that in the chat for people to read later. That is an example of encountering the sublime. And the sublime and the beautiful, it's something that, the beautiful is something that you encounter that makes you feel nice. The sublime is something you encounter and it fills you with fear, but a really healthy fear, because it displaces your sense of self and gives you a sense of smallness in the context of the vastness of the world, the vastness of the galaxy. And that's really, really healthy, because again, back to our human nature, that we're all too inclined. It's all too easy for us to see the world from our perspective, and it's a lot more difficult to see it from others, the perspective of others. But what the sublime does is that what Iris Murdoch, who was an Irish philosopher, she calls it, we have to continually declare war on what she calls the fat, relentless ego, this part of ourselves, the ego that is constantly inflated and nurtured, and we have to do things and have habits and practices that shrink it, that deflate it, and encounter the sublime, whether it's looking up at the California redwoods and these beautiful, historic trees, or whether it's being on the ocean during a storm and the ferocity of the waves crashing on the rocks, or looking up at space at night and contemplating the vastness of the galaxies, or being in space and looking down on the smallness and fragility of Earth. All of these are examples of encountering the transcendent, the sublime. And there's a whole growing literature about awe and why that is important for psychological well-being and physical and emotional health. That, again, it displaces the self. It displaces ourself from the center of the universe, and it broadens our horizons. And I share this with you because as mediators, I think one of the most excellent things that you do is that you give people perspective, right? You help people to zoom out and not just see things like with the monovision that we're so inclined to see things through. And instead, you have this visual in your mind of the overview effect. Like what are stories you can tell? What are ways that you can shift people's perspectives and shift our contexts, broaden our horizons in the way that I think our society needs to have its horizons broadened and shifted away from the myopic day-to-day squabbles of the culture wars and the daily scandal, the daily tweet, whatever it is. And to, again, displace our sense of self, displace our sense of moral correctness, and to put, which puts into perspectives our daily squabbles, and just your ability to do that, to tell your clients, the two parties, think about what else you could be doing if you weren't fighting over this XYZ issue. How might instead of relitigating the past, what more productive things could you be working towards and building and growing in your endeavors, in your life, focusing on your kids, your family, your businesses, your creative endeavors. And those are all examples of perspective shifting, right? Like broadening people's horizons. It's really easy to kind of just nurse old grievances and grudges, and to focus on an injustice that you desperately want to see righted. And that's a good and moral response that we ought to have. But to remind people that there are lots of injustices in the world, unfortunately, in this imperfect, fallen world we live in. And it's not our obligation to right every single one. We can't. that would crush us, that would crush anyone. And that we have to at some point be willing to, let go, even if it means we take a hit, even if it means we live with an injustice being done to us that is never righted this side of eternity, that we can move forward in strength and wholeness, and not let one part of our brain and emotional energy be, dripping out and leaking by nursing these old grievances. That these are all gifts, I think, that you can give to your clients that you do give to your clients, helping them zoom out, broaden their horizons, and hopefully move forward in resolution and in strength. And better people for, and this is also a really interesting thing that you can give people as well. Instead of having people emerge hobbled from a conflict, which can often feel that way, how can you tell them a story of resilience? Leave them with a feeling like this has made you stronger, even if it's not exactly the resolution that you wanted. I think as mediators, you've had a good success if both parties walk away feeling they haven't gotten everything they've wanted, right? But even if people are frustrated by a resolution, that you can say, help them tell themselves a story of resilience, of anti-fragility, that this controversy, this conflict has made you a better person. It's taught you something. It's made you stronger and better able, better equipped to go forth in your respective marketplace of life and strength. So those are just a few ideas of ways that I'm grateful for all of your work you're doing. You're on the front lines of this essential work of helping us peacefully coexist across deep difference. Clausewitz, the famous scholar of war, he said that politics is war by other means. And the inverse is also true, that war is politics by other means. That if people like you are not helping parties peacefully reconcile and move forward in strength, that violence is always on the table. And I say this to, public leaders and politicians and that I talk with as well. Like, our institutions are beautiful and they're in place for a reason, but they can only do so much. That when the institutions that help us peacefully navigate our differences fail or are hobbled because of our inability to we live in an age of hyperpartisanship and deep polarization that mean our democratically elected officials are not doing what they're supposed to be doing. That when our institutions are crippled and aren't working as they should be, that violence, unfortunately, becomes an option again. And that's not good for anyone. I think we insufficiently appreciate that the peace and prosperity that we know today is not a foregone conclusion. I mean, we live in a time of war right now in Russia and the Middle East, and that, in our history as well, America was founded on revolution and protest. We've fought a civil war. We've had a history of protest and violence, and it's not a foregone conclusion that those things are realities of the past, that they could be realities of our present, of our future, and no one wants them to be. But that is where you come in and why your work is so important. And I just want to thank you for what you do.
Well, Lexi, thank you for all that. Thank you for giving me permission to refer to you informally as Lexi. Let's start with one of the last things you mentioned, which is what you might say to people in the process of settling a lawsuit. And we know that the person who's paying money is paying more than they think they should pay. The person who's getting is not getting as much as they think they deserve to. I find sometimes, and I believe other mediators do, it's challenging to talk to people about resilience and moving forward and strengthening themselves through the process without sounding patronizing, or without sounding like the mediator is trying to the CYA for the mediator in not having helped these people obtain the settlement they really, really wanted. So how practically, how might one phrase these sorts of things in ways that don't sound patronizing or self-serving?
It's such an important question. One thing that I think excellent mediators are good at is making their connection to the client, to both parties respectively personal. Getting to know, we know what they don't like, and often they don't like the other side. They don't like the situation they're in. But what do they love? What are they passionate about? Are they passionate about their kids? Are they passionate about building their business? Are they passionate about, what is it that they love? And what are the opportunity costs of persisting, of pursuing? And at what point is it better for the soul and, for the purse, for, an emotional, psychological, financial, practical level? At what level is it better to take an imperfect resolution to move on and to be stronger as you pursue proactive, productive things, as opposed to being mired down in retroactive, rehashing the past and relitigating old grievances and grudges like that. People, I think, we don't have a high enough appreciation of um, our emotional energy and what is lost in pursuing something that is retroactive, that is in the past. And I think your challenge as a mediator is to help people quantify that cost, that it's not costless. Like that there are financial costs, those you can quantify those. There are costs in terms of time, you can quantify those. What you can't quantify is the little part of your brain and that is like constantly dedicated to the matter. And that you're losing something. That is a serious cost. In my mind, that's the highest cost. And, often these things are personal, right? Like even if it starts out like as a business, but it becomes a personal thing. And so how do you help people tell themselves a story that personally makes it more worthwhile to move on than to keep fighting, to keep persisting? And I think one effective tool to do that is to reframe, to help people zoom out and see the small quibble in the context of the broader schemes in life, in context of the vastness of the galaxy, right? Like getting back to Shatner and the overview effect, and that's a tool that is at your disposal to help people reframe and contextualize both the costs and the benefits of possibly letting go and moving on.
Yes, the great Roger Fisher, late professor at Harvard Law School, one of the authors of Getting to Yes, used to use the expression, go to the first row of the balcony and try to view the situation as if you're in the first row of the balcony looking down at it
Yes.
unfold on a stage.
Yes.
So when you talk about the getting to those personal things, those intangibles, they're hard to quantify.
Yeah.
As mediators, we basically get to work with people for a day.
Mm-hmm.
They know they're lawyers, but chances are we don't know the parties themselves. They come in, the lawyers sometimes are very protective of their clients and resist efforts by the mediator to talk too much to their client. And it's hard enough when we're in person. And now, of course, many of us do a lot of our mediations on Zoom. So when we're either in person or in the online environment, what are some good techniques or some good icebreaker questions that we can try to ask people to start getting below the surface? What's working?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. Well, I think if possible for you and all parties, being in person is always better. I think we learned that during the pandemic, that virtual is a very poor substitute for the in-person interaction. And there's, research about how the brain works in overtime, trying to pick up on different nuances and cues. Like, we feel exhausted at the end of a day of Zoom meetings because it's like our brain is actually literally working harder, trying to understand the body language and facial expressions that are much easier to grasp and be attuned to and work with and respond to in person. So that's my first thing. Always, whether it's having, and I talk about this when people ask me about social media, what do we do when we have my first comment is always like, don't argue on social media, right? Like if it's just a crazy person online, like don't respond. If it's someone that has like come at you out of the woodwork saying, you're wrong on this or X, Y, I disagree with you, or you're terrible. Like if someone and there's a history context there and you think it's worth trying to salvage the relationship, reach out and try to move that in person, because we're much less likely to do and say vitriolic things when we're in proximity and we're seeing the humanity of the person on the other side of an issue from us. So that's my first piece of advice, that if you can, in person wherever possible, for a multitude of reasons, mostly just helps maintain the humanity of the other and fosters that connection. A second is, trying to, this is where curiosity is also a great tool of connection. Like curiosity breeds curiosity. The more that you learn, the more that you want to learn. And as a mediator, the greater baseline of knowledge you have about various things, hobbies, interests, science, history, whatever it is, that's a great baseline for you to come in and be able to be conversant and establish a connection with the people that you're trying to mediate between. So, trying early on to find those areas of commonality between you and them, establishing that rapport. Maybe you have a passion for collecting coins or modeled trains, or even if you don't have a passion for it, if you know something about it and can be a little bit conversant with someone on their point of passion, like the defenses, you can see kind of the tension melt away, right? They're there to have a conversation about something they hate that they would prefer not to be there, probably, right? They'd probably prefer not to be in that situation, probably prefer not to be in litigation, be in a mediating room. But like, again, the moment you kind of shift the focus for even just momentarily to something, to a joy and to a point of commonality, that is beautiful and that's important. And that can go miles to like you having the moral authority to speak to them about something. They're much more inclined to listen. The defenses are down, and you all of a sudden have an opportunity to speak to them in a way that, and in a way that they might actually hear and listen and heed in a way that they wouldn't if you just come out and like got right down to base, talk about brass tacks and what's, how do we find a way forward? And of course, once the rapport is established, you are even given permission, perhaps, to tell a hard truth. And this is a core part of my argument in my book, that there's an essential distinction between civility and politeness. That politeness is manners, it's etiquette, it's technique, it's superficial, it's external, whereas civility is internal. It's a disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals who are worthy of a bare minimum of respect by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. And that crucially, sometimes actually respecting someone, actually loving someone, requires being impolite, telling a hard truth, engaging in robust debate. And, as a mediator, you have a duty to tell someone a hard truth. But the service that you can do and how you can honor the context that you're in is to establish that rapport, make that person feel like you see them, you know them, you care about them, you care about this, and finding a just solution. That gives you permission to speak that hard truth. You're doing it in love. You're doing it out of respect, that you're not just coming in there and you're being unfair and you're trying to, get the best deal for the other side. Because that's a story that you could imagine someone telling if they feel the mediator's coming at them and not really hearing their perspective, not seeing their side of the story. But once you make them feel seen and known and appreciated and respected, perhaps through establishing those commonalities, those areas of commonality, passion, shared interest, that gives you an incredible moral authority and power to, again, speak civilly, not politely, right? Like you're not papering over difference. You're saying, no, there's a difference here and we have to talk about this. And I want to help you. I want to help you get this done. I think everyone here is better off finding a resolution now and moving on with their lives rather than, again, relitigating the past in ways that is expensive psychologically, emotionally, financially.
So it's really, in a sense, not focusing on victimhood, but focusing on agency.
Yes.
And trying to empower, to use a word that's often used in mediation training, figuring out a way to empower people to view themselves as having agency, and that establishing the rapport is critical to being able to speak civilly, directly, getting beyond the nice. It's an interesting challenge for mediators, particularly earlier years of mediation, we were sometimes mocked by the legal community as being a bunch of hot tub practitioners, and kumbaya was a phrase that was often thrown in our face, and linking pinkies and, stuff like that. And, generally speaking, I don't think the legal community wants Mr. Rogers as their mediator, but they don't want Hulk Hogan either. And threading that needle can sometimes be a real challenge for us. Does that trigger any thoughts in your mind how to thread that needle?
Yeah, It's an interesting question. I mean, today there are two groups of people in our public life. There are people who they want to just, kumbaya, and we can just like all talk nicely to one another, then this will resolve all of our problems. And there's another contingent that says, no, we want to puncture that culture of hypocrisy and pretense and polish, and we need to be willing to talk hard truths, and we need to be willing to take the gloves off and go to the mattresses in order to beat the other side. And both these contingents uh, fail to make this important distinction between civility and politeness. That again, politeness, it actually, I love etymology, that the story and history of languages is throughout the book. And as the politeness is poliere, which means to smooth, the Latin poliere, which means to smooth or polish. And that's what politeness does. It focuses on superficial, external, the veneer of life together. Whereas civility is a disposition of the heart. It's a way of seeing others as our moral equals, worthy of a bare minimum of respect by virtue of our shared moral status as members of the human community. And that crucially, again, sometimes actually, and it comes from that Latin root, civitas, which means is a Latin root for city, citizenship, and civilization, and the citizen. And that civility is the duty and the conduct befitting a citizen in the city. And that again requires debate. It requires honest truth telling. It doesn't require, papering over difference and sweeping difference under the rug, which is again why what you do in trying to get people to see the other side's perspective is so essential. And I wonder, like, are there mediators in Congress? Are there people who are, dedicated trying to get congressional leaders to find a middle ground between these two extremes and increasing polarities in our public life? Because if not, I think that's a ripe avenue for for conversation.
Yeah, we had one such a mediator on this webinar just a
Right.
few weeks ago. So it's a great irony in the world of mediation, and I'm sure every mediator on the line will tell you they've encountered this. Many times the people who are most wrong, that is, their cases are weak. They're going to make bad witnesses. The judge is ruled against them in all kinds of preliminary matters. This thing is just swirling down the drain. The people who are the most wrong, shall we say, are the most convinced that they are in fact right. They're just seem to be unshakable in it
Yeah.
because of something, right? And as mediators, we're not therapists, we're not psychologists or psychiatrists. What are some techniques for being civil and effective in dealing with people like that?
Yeah, it's Winston Churchill said, a fanatic is someone who won't change their mind and can't change the subject. And what do you do with a fanatic? What can you do if there's someone that is just so certain in their ways? The best you can do, first of all, like, you're just one person and you're one voice that hopefully is one of many voices that can help them, listen to reason and be open to change their mind and at least seeing another point of view. But I mean, that's the best thing that you can do, is just poking holes in like the neatness of their theory that enables them to maybe at a later date be open to another perspective. But I just want to affirm the humility that you all must have, that you're not going to win every single one. And if you do encounter a party that again can't change their mind, won't change the subject, that's how they've chosen to go about this particular issue or about their life in general, even, that there's only so much you can do. And that's hard, that you have to come to the other party and say, like, I'm sorry, I did the best I could, but this isn't really productive. This isn't really going anywhere.
Yes, sometimes I think one of our role models as mediator is the toreador. You wave the cape as the bull goes by, and you hope you don't get gored as in the process. That's sometimes what a mediation feels like. Let's go back to something you mentioned at the very beginning of your comments about people speaking face to face with each other, and that tends to dissipate a lot of the demonization that takes place in conflict and mediation situations. Every mediator on this webinar will go, okay, we have a lot of situations where, based on our mediation training, we're trained to bring people together at the beginning of the mediation or very early in the mediation process, have people go through an agenda, exchange information, get new perspectives on things, and hopefully create some latitude in people's thinking for further negotiation and bargaining. And then we get a lot of lawyers who say, oh my gosh, last thing I want is to be in the room with these other people. They're a bunch of hotheads. No matter what I say, boom, it'll be a thermonuclear explosion. It'll go way off the track. My clients will get very antagonized. Plus, we already know everything that they have to say. There's no learning to be done here, Jeff. So please just keep us at separate ends of the hall and just shuttle numbers back and forth between us. And by and large, mediators, or at least mediators of my generation, think that's kind of a hollow process and doesn't really plumb the depths of what we can offer. We want to offer more, but we get resistance. What could be effective in dealing with that?
Yeah, like how to, is your question like how to puncture through this perception with parties that you're more than a glorified kind of carrier pigeon, just like shuttling offers back and forth? Is
how to get people who are reluctant to have direct communication to engage in that direct communication, to go beyond the metronome, the shuttle diplomacy. When people come in so resistant to sitting in a room together with each other, because one, they think they already know everything the other has to say, and number two, they think it'll get emotionally out of control.
Mm-hmm.
What can we do when we as mediators in our hearts and minds think there's a lot of benefit that could be gained from getting people together?
You mean like putting people in the same room?
Yeah, putting people in the same room.
Yeah. It's really interesting. It's I'd be curious to hear from you. What are the circumstances in which you think it is helpful to get people in the same room versus when it is helpful to have distance?
There are a few cases.
Or is it always beneficial to have people? What do you think?
It may not all, as mediators, we don't want to say always, because every case is different. And there are some cases where you know that if you put these people in a room together, it would be like dropping two cats into a mailbox. They would just tear each other to pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Cases I think are few and far between, and far fewer than the number of cases that the lawyers who are our clients think is in that category. And we as mediators say, boy, if we could get these people together, some, maybe much of the demonization would dissipate. There's things that they don't really understand well about each other's perspectives. Maybe they don't understand each other's resolve. Maybe they don't understand each other's view of the facts and the law. And we think that there's a lot that could be gained from that kind of, we call them joint sessions generally, that kind of direct communication. And there are many lawyers who just, lay down on the railroad tracks against that sort of thing. And we'd like to be able to do a better job of convincing them that there is indeed benefit to be gained from getting together face to face.
Mm-hmm.
What might work in your experience?
That's so interesting that you kind of, is it primarily lawyers who deem that a bad idea and who try to prevent it? So, I mean, again, lawyers are my husband's an attorney, so I can disparage lawyers all I want, I think. But no, lawyers are very important. That they have an important role. Their duty is to protect and seek the interests of their client, and again, they're there to provide a level of insulation from their client to the issue and their client to the other party. And so it's almost as if that resistance that you get is maybe them protecting that their role, their insulation, their authority, like that they're the only one able to speak to their client as opposed to you speaking to them or the other party saying something that might cause their client to change their mind. And so I guess, what you can do is, speak to the client directly and ask, make them curious about what they might learn from from the encounter, the exchange, how they might grow, how they might be challenged by it, but how it might be a really helpful exercise as well, especially if it's a step towards resolution. It might be, you can be modest and not over promising, but say it might be nothing, but it could be really helpful. Why not give it a try? If not, like we know we've tried everything. But I think that your gift to mediation, your gift to both clients is that you want them to feel like they did their best. That if the end goal is to have this be put behind, then you want people to feel like this was a worthwhile endeavor, that they're paying you, they're paying their lawyer, they're paying in their time, right? Being there, that presumably they have a vested interest in hopefully finding a resolution. Remind them of the costs of them being there. Remind them of the reason why they're there. But yeah, it is interesting, I think, to me that lawyers tend to be the ones that are opposed to joint sessions. And I just want to share with everyone that anyone who chooses to buy my book, I've created a set of gifts, $500 worth of gifts, called as just a pure thank you for buying the book. And one of them is an ebook called Cultivating Curiosity, the hidden secret to the life well lived, and to also healing our divides. So I'll put that link in here, that once you order the book, you can go to this link and claim your gifts, including a kind of handbook on to how to be curious and how to cultivate curiosity, which I hope could be an excellent tool for you as you try to foster mutual learning and curiosity on both sides in your endeavors as arbitrators and lawyers and mediators.
Well, I'm intrigued. You've made me very curious. Now, here's another question for dealing with lawyers. Sometimes it seems incivility might pay, right? And we see situations where lawyers have a fiduciary obligation to their client to get the very best result. And if a lawyer thinks that they can use a power dynamic, right? And women lawyers, we hear from women lawyers that older men sometimes try to bully and berate them. Less experienced lawyers say that more experienced lawyers try to browbeat and bully and berate and behave with incivility in an attempt to overpower, overwhelm a quote unquote less powerful lawyer in order to try to get a better result for the client to whom they owe the obligation to get the best result possible. What about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. One aspect of my book, I argue that civility is its own reward and incivility is its own punishment. And I actually borrow from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who in turn borrows from Socrates, who says something very similar, that virtue is its own reward, vice is its own punishment. And Dr. King, in his letter from Birmingham jail, says that segregation is mutually harmful. It's mutually dehumanizing. It hurts the party who is segregated and hurts the party who is a segregator. It deforms their soul by giving a false sense of inferiority or superiority. And I borrow that idea and build on it and apply it to civility, saying that when we are cruel, when we are malicious to others, when we abuse a power dynamic, when we make someone feel degraded as a human being, we don't just hurt the other. We hurt ourselves too. We are made a little bit less human, a little bit less humane. Our souls become deformed. But just as incivility is mutually harmful, acts of civility, grace, compassion, mercy are mutually ennobling, that affirming the dignity and humanity in the other and seeing them and treating them as an equal, that is its own reward. It ennobles, it humanizes both parties. And this is a core argument of my book, that we can't control others. We can only control ourselves. And that I hope that in speaking to people, I hope that people hear this message and they, we hear this language that nice guys finish last, that you have to be willing to take the gloves off and fight to the mattresses in order to succeed, to win, to beat the other side. And that, that sort of mentality doesn't just hurt the other side, that it hurts us too. And I hope that readers who read my book and are tempted to engage in incivility in order to win, that they have a greater appreciation of this reality, that when we are malicious, kind, abuse of power dynamic, that we're not just hurting others, we're hurting us, we're hurting ourselves as well. And I hope that tempers their desire, that there is no actually winning if you have debased someone along the way, if you've compromised, one's own values in order to win and get ahead.
Yes, I'm reminded, Lexi, early in my career, I attended a program on professionalism put on by the barristers wing of the Bar Association, Young Lawyers Division, and we were addressed by a very senior lawyer named Ellis Horvitz. He recently passed away. I was in my mid-20s at the time. I thought he was ancient. He was probably 55 years old. And he was already at a very elevated stature, one of the most esteemed lawyers in Los Angeles. And he came up to the podium and could have heard a pin drop in the room. And he was addressing this group of about 100 young lawyers. And he kind of looks up to the sky and he says, over the many years of my practice, he says, many of our most crushing defeats have come at the hands of perfect ladies and gentlemen.
Right.
And yes, I think that in lawyering, the distinction between aggression or civility and effectiveness and belligerence sometimes gets blurred. And what really makes a lawyer effective and aggressively effective is not belligerent demeanor, but rather thoroughness of preparation and knowing when to hold them and when to fold them.
Mm-hmm.
We have just a minute or two left. Do you have any final words of wisdom for us, Lexi?
Just thank you. Thank you for your passion for this most important topic of our day. How do we flourish? How do we peacefully coexist, even when we deeply disagree? I mean, your role is indispensable, and just the amount of emotional toll, financial toll, cost to our system, our legal system that you avert in helping people reconcile, find resolution earlier rather than later. I mean, it's invaluable, the personal resolution that you help restore. And I want to encourage you not to neglect yourselves and your own personal soul care along the way. It can be really exhausting, I'm sure, to just be at the heart of these really controversial and demanding conflicts. That takes a toll. And so, make sure you have your own habits of renewal and restoration to keep you sharp, keep you filled emotionally, spiritually, psychologically, so you're able to keep giving in the way that you do. And I have tools for you in the final chapter of my book for how to continue to do that. So I hope that that's a resource and an encouragement to you. So my final word is thank you for what you do. Don't forget self-care. I mean, that's really the subtitle of my book. My book is The Soul of Civility. And then the subtitle is Timeless Principles to Heal Society and Ourselves, that we really, in healing ourselves and in staying healed, keeping our own demons, our own wounds at bay and nurtured, and that we are better able to heal those around us. And you guys are in the business of social healing. That's your vocation. That's your calling, which is what the word vocation means. The Latin word vocare means to call. You are called to be peacemakers and reconcilers. And that is what we need now more than ever in this broken and fraught time. So thank you and keep up the great work. And I hope that this book is a tool for you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. One approach to self-care and self-improvement, I dare say, recommend to people, get the book, The Soul of Civility. I benefited from reading it, and I think everyone on the line will as well. In addition to getting the book, please consider contributing to the Gleaners Food Bank. We've listed the link in the chat. Alexandra Hudson, this was just a terrific hour. Thank you so much. We are complete.